Okay, today I want to talk about something near and dear to everyone who fly fishes. Reels. What do you need? What don't you need? What's the point? What's good to have? What's worthless? What to look for when you're buying a fly reel. First and foremost, let's talk about what everybody wants to talk about. Drag. Do you need it? Do you not need it? How much do you need? This is a Redington Behemoth. Redington says it makes 30 pounds of drag. That's a lot. That might be more than any fly reel out there. Like, it is a ton of drag. If I crank this down, it's hard for me, very hard for me to move that reel around. For saltwater fish, you might want a lot of drag. I don't know if you want 30 pounds, not even for a tarpon, but I guess it's good to know you have it. More important than total strength when it comes to drag is smoothness, startup inertia. Startup inertia is the way a reel starts to take off when line is being removed for it. So, that's going to be, let me get some of this off of here. Long leader. There we go. So, add a little drag. When that reel starts to pull, fish starts to pull, how smoothly does line pull off that reel? That's startup inertia. Does it take a lot of resistance and then does it skip and jump? That's something that's very important, because if that's happening, you're going to pop hooks, break tippet, all things you don't want, naturally. The Behemoth is a nice reel. We won't talk about compromises and why the Behemoth is so cheap just quite yet. We'll get to that. Drag. Do you need it? A lot of people can get away with a clicker. It has no real drag. This knob just gives you a little bit more, a little bit less click. The point there is basically so you don't backlash your reel. Let me show you what actual clicker is. Pull this reel apart. So you got a gear here. And on the inside of the reel, you've got little points of contact. And all they do, that gear just clicks against those points. And you can see here, I'll turn that knob. It's just going to loosen that spring a little bit, give you a tiny bit less amount of pressure. And that, again, isn't really drag. Of course, scientifically it's resistance, it's drag, but that's nothing like disc drag. That's nothing like that at all. It's very much different. It's my opinion that most freshwater fish, you can get away with just a clicker. I was just watching a video the other day, Kelly Gallup talking about the exact same thing. You look at a lot of steelhead guys and they're using, big hardy clickers, and you think, well, why are they doing that for, a 30-pound steelhead? The idea is you get a big steelhead. I can't put this reel back together now. You get a big steelhead and you apply a bunch of drag to him, and his first thought is to get away from that pressure and go downstream. And then you got to chase fish downstream. You got other problems altogether. You use a clicker and you're not putting enough pressure on that fish to make him want to move like that. And that's the idea. You want to bring that fish to you. So you're just using the pressure of the line in the water. And when you got a lot of fly line out in the water, it's enough pressure to keep a fish stuck. Trout, smallmouth, even largemouth, unless, the exception being you're hunting 12, 10-pound trophy largemouth, which there aren't a lot of people out there doing that on a fly rod. I wish I was, but I live in Pennsylvania. We don't have a lot of trophy largemouth in Pennsylvania. But there's nothing wrong with a clicker wheel. I mean, you can chase almost any freshwater species with a clicker of, an appropriate size. Another thing is, you're stripping line in with your hand. You can do that so much faster than you can turn a reel. Like, you have so much more control than you do with the reel, and you always have that option. So basically, if you don't need drag, don't worry about it. Like, you don't need drag to fight a 12-inch trout. You don't need it. I was fishing maybe a month or two ago, in a little local stream, very small, Spring Creek, and I came upon a guy in the middle of the creek, knee deep, rod high up in the air, fish on the reel, and he's running around, and I look down and it's like a 10-inch trout. And I was like, just go ahead and net it, man. Pull it in. It's done. You do not need to fight a fish. Like, we all want to fight fish. I get it. But trout especially, we want to conserve the resource. We don't want to fight them to death, literally. Pull the fish in. If you don't need drag on your reel, don't worry about it. It's really not a big deal. You can learn to use a clicker, learn to control your line with your hand. You'll be better off anyway. Then when you do need drag, be glad you have it. You already have skills developed. What else do we want to talk about? Let's get away from drag. Let's talk about bad drag. This is a garbage fly reel that I bought off eBay 100 years ago because I thought that I needed something cool looking. Because, let's be honest, fly reels are a lot of marketing. There's a lot of reasons out there where people are like, oh, I need to have that fly reel because it's cool. And that's fine. I fall into that trap. I buy stuff because it's cool looking. This, cool looking, maybe. It's an absolute piece of garbage. The first time I dunked it in water, it totally seized up and didn't move. I sprayed the drag full of WD-40, took it all apart, and now it kind of works. I'll turn that drag down just a little bit, and I'll show you what bad drag looks like. See, it just slips and skips, and it's not good. You don't want that. So, something like that is something you want to avoid. Now, there are totally good options, even, let's say you need drag, or you think you need drag, totally serviceable options in sub $100 price range. I mean, there's stuff like, that's a Redington ID. This one has a donut on it. If you don't know about these are replaceable, changeable vinyl decals. They've got like 40 or some of them. They're very, very cool. A great reel for the money. For the money. They are very inexpensive. I think you can get them somewhere around $80. I really like that reel for a lot of reasons. We'll come back to that. Second thing we want to talk about, and we'll talk about that Redington ID some more as well, is the construction of the reel. Is it cast or is it machined aluminum? Now, there used to be a much, much larger difference between the two. Oh, this thing is such a piece of junk. Let's get rid of that. Cast aluminum reels were generally all garbage back in the day. Now, recently things have gotten a lot better. You can get a cast aluminum reel that is very high performance. The Behemoth is a cast aluminum reel. I've got a 7.8 and a 5.6. I love them. They are great reels. They're light. They have a load of drag if you need that sort of thing. And just generally, they're just cool. They're very cool looking. I mean, that's a cool looking reel, like it or not. But they are cast aluminum. Now, the difference between cast aluminum and machined aluminum, be still. Let's talk about this bat and kill. This is machined. It's a very light. Machined reels are going to tend to be lighter. They have better tolerances. And they don't break or bend as easily. Not to say you can't break or bend machined aluminum. Of course you can. But cast stuff tends to be a little bit softer, a little easier to mess up. Let me show you an example. So this Behemoth, I've had this for quite a while. I dropped it one day, dropped it on the foot, and now I have to crank it into a reel seat to get it to sit right. Not to say you couldn't do that with a machined reel. Could do that very easily, but it seems like it's easier to do with a cast reel. Now, this is a spool for this Behemoth that I bought off eBay. It's a different color than the reel. And this spool is tweaked a little bit, and it rubs right here on the reel. You can hear that. Cool. Right there. Ugh. Not pleasant at all. At the time I bought it, I didn't really mess with the spool for a little while, and I was like, whatever. Then I finally found out that it was bad or bad. I just said, yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. But you can actually see where it's rubbing there. Anyway, now that could be a real problem. Say you hook into something like a bonefish and it takes off 100 miles per hour towards Mexico and you wear a hole right through the rim of your spool. You know, that could be a real problem. That's what one of the dangers of, I'm just making a mess, aren't I? One of the dangers of cast reels. It's just a fact of life. If you have a cast reel, that can happen. Now, the advantage is cast reels are so much cheaper. To get a reel that would perform like a behemoth in, you know, drag and weight that's machined, you're talking about a boatload of money. Like real hardcore saltwater reels, let's say Able, Tabor, Nautilus, stuff like that. You're talking $500-600 minimum. I mean, you could be talking $1,200. You could be talking $1,500. So to get that kind of performance, and these clock in at what? About $100 for this size, $120 for the bigger saltwater sizes. You cannot beat it for the price. You just have to know that it has limitations when you look at cast reels. Same with that ID. That's a cast reel. And again, this isn't a reel that you're going to have bonefish ripping line off of, you know. This is a little 5.6. And the one thing I really like about these reels is spools are stupid cheap. So the reel, I think the reel retails for around $80, give or take. I couldn't tell you what it is right now off the top of my head. But you can get spools, there's one right there, for, I think they're $44.99, $45. So you can have, you know, a real aggressively tapered floating head. You can have a intermediate line. You can have a Skagit setup. And you can have that all with you, ready to go, ready to swap out. And for cheap, I mean, spools generally, historically, have not been a cheap thing. I think we talk about $100 minimum usually. And stuff like this really opens up your options. And it's got the cool decals. It's got, you know, usable drag. Again, I don't think in this reel size you need it. And that's just me. But to each their own. You want to put a 10-inch trout on the reel and have line zinging off of it, go ahead. Do your thing. Just, I think it's important to remember what you're buying a reel for. That's all. Another thing to think about is arbor size. The behemoth, this is a 5.6. A relatively large arbor. The arbor is the center of the reel. So, especially when you pack your backing in there, there's a lot of backing on this one. You've got a very large surface out here, you know, in diameter. And so when you're cranking, you're bringing in more line per turn. What else we got here? This is a Lamson Remix. This is the big one, the 4. It's a pretty large arbor out there. And that's, you know, you're talking about big fish. You want to pick up line quickly as possible if they're running towards you. And you need a big arbor for that. Something like this little Redington Drift, which is an awesome reel, by the way. They don't make them anymore. I love this little reel. Pretty small arbor. Same as, you know, this Bat & Kill. Very small arbor in there. And I got a lot of stuff on there. And that's a Skagit set up. There's backing, running line, a head, a tip. But that's, you know, another story altogether. So you want to consider arbor size, especially if you're fishing saltwater, fishing for, you know, large species that are going to be taking line off the reel, and you need to collect it quick. That's one of the only considerations you really need to think about arbor size, in my opinion. Another thing to think about when you buy a reel is style. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. I buy reels because I think they're cool all the time. Like, this is cool. The donut's kind of goofy, but you can get all kinds of decals, and it's a cool reel. I mean, it's definitely a cool looking little reel. Same thing with this. These Lamson reels. This is a great example of a reel that takes cast technology and machine technology. The spools for this reel, got one right here, are actually cast aluminum, and they're very nicely done, and they actually match up with the Lamson Liquid, which is their base model reel. So they're liquid spools, but they fit into the Remix. And they're very inexpensive. I mean, they are not, you're not going to break the bank if you need to get a couple of these. They actually sell a kit. I think it's the reel and 3 spools. And I think in, you know, like 5, 6, 7 size, it's like 150, 160 bucks. So you're smoking good deal. But this is cool because the outer cage of this reel is all machined. And then you've got a cast spool. It gives you a little more protection over here, and it looks really cool, which, like I said, I'm certainly not immune to wanting to buy cool looking stuff. One other thing that people consider when they're buying reels, and this is, I don't know how I feel about this personally. That's the sound a reel makes. Some people are stuck on it. Like, it's very important to them what kind of sound that reel makes. Let's look at this. This is the Redington Drift. This is a 3/4 weight. This is a tiny little one. I like this reel a lot. I like everything about this reel. And this reel has a great sound. Like, it is just quintessential clicker, if you ask me. It's like deep and spanky. I don't know. I just dig it. I think it sounds great. But I wouldn't care if it didn't. I'd still like the reel a ton. Bat and Kill's kind of similar. Another clicker. Got a Skagit head on there. It keeps bumping into stuff. But that's a good sounding reel as far as things go. The ID is very muted. Very muted. But again, that's something that's totally personal preference. Do you want your reel to sound a certain way? Fine. You are totally allowed to do that. And one other thing to consider, and this is probably the main consideration for most people, is what does it cost? You know, is something like an ID, say you're going to spend 75, 80 bucks, maybe 90 bucks on, it's a cast reel. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with a cast reel at all, especially if you're mostly fishing freshwater, if you're fishing for trout, if you're fishing for bass. Nothing wrong with that at all. Is that more in your price range than stepping up to something, like let's say these Lamson remixes where you get a little machined aluminum, you get a little cast aluminum, or stepping up to something like a Lamson Speeder, or stepping up to something, do you want an Able or a Tibor, or do you need to have a hatch reel? Is it that important to you to have a brand name? I think you really got to sit down and say, how much money do I want to spend for what this reel is for? If you need a serious saltwater machine that's going to be, chasing big fish every single day, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. Like, that's how it works. You don't really get a choice in the matter. Do you go fish for trout or bass occasionally, a couple times a year? You don't need to spend a whole lot of money. Case in point, this is an old Redington, what he's called Crosswater. Jeez, I'm just taking the place apart here. And I got this on the very first fly rod I ever bought, a Redington Crosswater. And it's a cheap plastic reel, and a Delrin, it's plastic. But it's totally serviceable. It holds line just fine. It has a drag knob. Excuse me. There's a full sinking line on here. It has drag, if you think you need that. But you can get something like this, for 40 bucks, I think. So it's basically, how much money do you want to spend? Is it more important to you to get a cheap reel? Is it more important to you to get something flashy? Is it more important to you to have high performance? Do you need high performance? I mean, those are the things you got to ask yourself. One last thing to consider. Oh my gosh. I should just lay these all down. One last thing to consider is balance. Now, when you put a reel on the end of a rod, the reel can affect the dynamics of the rod. So let's say you put a very heavy reel on a rod. It's going to bring that tip up and make the rod feel butt heavy. Other way around, you put a very light reel on a rod, it could take the tip down, make it feel tip heavy. Now, the baseline here is, if you have a 3 or 4 weight rod, get a 3 or 4 weight reel. That's a great place to start. Some people will go so far as to take their reel to the fly shop, try it on a rod, see how it balances, have a little fly line on there. But and then you have to consider you're casting that rod, you're not going to have all of your fly line on the reel. So that's more weight you got to account for here or there. I don't put a whole lot of stock into that. I understand that some people want to maximize their casting efficiency as much as possible, and having a perfectly balanced reel is a great way to do that. And I don't discount that at all. For me, meh. Get a reel that feels good on your rod. That's about as far as I take it. Again, personal opinion. Do what you want to do. And I think that's really about all there is to say about this. The moral of the story is you're going to end up with more than one reel if you do much fly fishing at all. And something to think about is definitely buying spools. So if you get a Redington ID, you can get a spool for a certain line. Or you can get a spool for an intermediate line. You can get a spool for a full sink line. And that's a great thing to have. The Behemoth is the same way. Spools are relatively inexpensive. You can pick them up on eBay here and they're new for 65, 70 bucks, stuff like that. So plan ahead. You buy a reel, say you buy a 5-6 weight reel, and use it for trout. You could use that for smallmouth. You could use it for largemouth if you wanted. Think ahead. Say, do I want to get some spools for this? How much do spools cost? Where can I get them? That's one of the things I like about the Redington reels, and I'm kind of selling Redington pretty hard here. I don't mean to. But the thing about them is you can pop on Amazon and grab them. You can get them direct from Redington. They're all over the place. Like, they are all over. And you can just go get one right now. And that's great. I'd say the same about Lamson to a degree. I really, really do like Lamson reels. This is strictly saltwater. It's a big, they call it 4 size. I think they call it 9-10 weight. And that's actually an 11 weight Cortland Crystal guideline. It's a really, really nice saltwater line. It has a mono core instead of a braided core. So it casts so differently than a regular freshwater or even some saltwater fly lines. But that's neither here nor there. The cool thing about Lamson is all of their reels have the exact same drag mechanism relative to size. So this Remix, or even the liquid in that size, has the exact same drag mechanism as their top of the line reels. So you can go out and get this for 200 some bucks, or you can go out and buy their top of the line reel for 5, 6, 7, 8. And you're getting the exact same drag mechanism, which is a really cool thing. I'm glad they do that. I think that's makes their technology accessible to most people. And I think that's about all we got to talk about. When it comes down to it, buy a reel you like, and that functions for what you need to do. Thanks for watching.